Good morning. My name is Colleen Russell. I was a worship associate here at UUI for several years. I've come out of retirement today to help with the service because I have a personal connection to our guest speaker. I've known Natalie Miller her whole life, as she is my niece. We both grew up in Cleveland, Catholic in Cleveland. We attended the same Catholic high school. We each discovered Unitarian Universalism after moving away in the 2000s. My journey brought me to Indiana. Her journey took her to Virginia. Natalie belongs to the Williamsburg Unitarian Universalists and works as a healthcare writer and researcher. She's a student at Meadville Lombard Seminary in Chicago, aiming for ordination as a UU minister in 2029. Please welcome her to our pulpit.
Almost everything we think we know about addiction is wrong. You get a rat and you put it in a cage, and you give it 2 water bottles. One is just water, and the other is water laced with either heroin or cocaine. If you do that, the rat will almost always prefer the drugged water and almost always kill itself quite quickly. Professor Alexander comes along and he looks at this experiment and he noticed something. We're putting the rat in an empty cage. So Professor Alexander built a cage that he called Rat Park. In Rat Park, they don't like the drugged water. You go from almost 100% overdose when they're isolated to 0% overdose when they have happy and connected lives. What if addiction is an adaptation to your environment? Human beings have a natural and innate need to bond. And when we're happy and healthy, we'll bond and connect with each other. But if you can't do that because you're traumatized or isolated or beaten down by life, you will bond with something that will give you some sense of relief. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Almost everything we think we know about addiction is wrong.
That is a much longer video. I highly recommend it for nuance and a little bit more exploration about that experiment. But the reason I shared it was, what if addiction is about your cage? What if connection matters more than we thought? To say, you are not alone and we love you is a powerful thing. Before I go deeper, I want to be clear. The tangle of addiction and queerness I refer to in my title does not mean I'm suggesting that all people who identify as queer are addicted to something, nor that anyone experiencing addiction does so because of their sexual orientation. Everyone has their own stories about addiction or queerness, and I aim to point out the correlation, not the causation. The correlation is significant, though, and give us some ideas on what we can do as a faith community to foster belonging. So for my purposes today, I'll focus on people who are cisgender, meaning that how they identify is consistent, that's where that comes from, with their gender assigned at birth, who have the experience of veering from the conventional path with their romantic or sexual desires, and how that shapes their sense of belonging. I'll simply use the umbrella term queer in the broadest sense. Historical thinking has been that you must be attracted to only people of the opposite gender and then pick one to commit to and reproduce with. Today, how people identify is fluid and nuanced and evolving quickly. But society often responds to choices that it finds unconventional the same way, with fear, disgust, and distance. It's been enforced in a variety of ways that you should stay on that path. But what if you don't? What if you don't want to? What if the way you do it isn't squarely in the range of acceptable? Can't you simply make yourself stay on that path? What incentives would you need to have? What kind of punishment would be enough to deter your inclination to go rogue and go off the path? What kind of substances would make it easier to go along with what's expected of you? The idea for this sermon came from a phone call with my dad a few years ago. He is a retired Catholic policeman who's been married to my mom for more than 50 years and leads recovery groups after more than 35 years of sobriety. The men's halfway house where he'd been working for years closed during the pandemic, and he went to the LGBTQ Life Center instead. I was surprised and amused, but he said it was the same classes he'd always done, and he is nothing if not persistent in his routines. One day he called me and said, "Natalie, I get why these people drink. Their lives are really hard." While I'm proud of him for going where he was needed, I also wanted to discourage him from distancing of these people. So I sent him, via Amazon, a kid's book called The ABCs of LGBT to help him get some simple background and encourage him to think bigger. Because it's not actually these people, it's our people. Queer people are everywhere. Sometimes they're just not as visible as you'd think. If all you have is stereotypes, you can miss that and inadvertently make yourself unwelcoming. Assumptions about heteronormativity, relationship goals, and gender expression often do this. It's not meeting people where they are. When I went looking for data on the correlation of substance use and queerness, a national survey from 2017 said that people who identify as gay or lesbian are more than twice as likely than those who identify as heterosexual to have a severe alcohol or tobacco use disorder. Bisexuals, 3 times as likely. And those who are unsure how to identify their sexual identity, 5 times as likely. Historically, people who are too different can be stigmatized, abused, or imprisoned. Due to inaccurate moral and medical models, many people feel justified in condemning behavior that they feel is off the conventional path. At different times in history, both queerness and addiction were labeled as sin or sickness, but maybe they're neither. While there is more widespread acceptance and communication about both, these are hard roads fought by people rejected by their families, their communities, and even if they were allowed to remain and not be exiled, they were often treated differently or unfairly. The choice for queer people became to be out and rejected or to hide and suffer, both leading to more pain. Disconnection leads to pain, which eventually leads to a need to soothe the pain, and a large percentage of the options can be destructive, particularly when indulged in regularly. Why are those numbers so high? There are a few reasons noted, including a desire to fit into a society that they may perceive as rejecting them, can make substances an easy go-to that helps regulate emotions in uncomfortable situations. Historically, many LGBTQ people found safe havens in nightlife spaces and bars. A social life that revolves around drugs and alcohol can increase people's risk of overuse. Living in a culture that is homophobic and heterosexist, being bullied, being rejected, experiencing social isolation can create traumatic experiences where the human body is overwhelmed. And the lived experience of being queer often comes with confusion, shame, rejection, and even violence. For the past 2 years, I've worked on a project related to recovery from opioid addiction and observed that people in recovery have an incredibly supportive culture. They're united in breaking down stigma and sharing research on what works. At conferences, people openly share stories about their long journeys to recovery, and many of the themes relate to how no one can do it alone. There have been touching revelations, support for the fresh recoveries, and appreciation of just how much an achievement a lasting recovery actually is. Across ages, races, genders, and substances, nearly everyone in the recovery community said that community support is critical, in addition to medical treatment, therapy, and peer support. There are also more openly queer people at these conferences, and I've noticed it expressed in a diversity of ways. The opposite of addiction is connection. Pain is part of the human experience, and we all need ways to process it. In her book, Daring Greatly, Brene Brown talks about numbing as a way to avoid introspection, prevent us from feeling uncomfortable emotions or vulnerability. She says that numbing behaviors are a form of emotional escapism that prevent us from living wholeheartedly and from connecting authentically. This is why we need to reserve judgment of others and ourselves. We all have ways to cope, and we all have unhealthy habits that can spiral and become harmful. These habits can include alcohol and drugs, but also food, money, work, or other escapisms. One of the indicators of this is even when the substances are removed, the behavior of addiction can continue. Weeding out these emotional and psychological patterns is an important component of recovery and therapy, which require brutal honesty about how we got here, who we are, and what it takes to feel worthy of love. That's why there's more work for all of us to do. Firstly, because we must all decide what we are going to do with our pain. And secondly, to create a culture that is less painful and more enlivening. That's hard to do when we distance ourselves out of fear or discomfort. And that's why we have to do the work to deconstruct myths about sexuality and religion, which in many cases have old messages about goodness. We offer a more welcoming alternative. You can be you, and you can also belong here, which is a wonderful thing. Many people like my dad grew up in an era where the idea of mental health wellness did not exist. While it's more frequently discussed today, old habits of avoiding vulnerability persist, and that may be part of your generational or family culture as well. There was also no formal sexual health education, and there are not always easy ways to relearn concepts about sexuality and gender. That means that encountering a difference with a genuine warm welcome is a continual practice. I think we are struggling as a culture right now because changes and shifts in every generation are hard to keep up with, and that can inadvertently cause pain to people who feel isolated or misunderstood. Here's a helpful metaphor from legendary podcaster Dan Savage called the layer cake of desire in ascending order. There's what you want to do, what you are doing, and what you tell the world you are doing. Savage says that the closer the alignment of those layers, the happier and more content we are, the more ourselves that we feel, basically. The further apart those layers are, the greater the mental and emotional dissonance, and the greater the toll it takes to try to reconcile them, or worse, endure the impossibility of ever reconciling them. One of the crucial differences about being a UU is that we're free to bring our whole selves here, and unencumbered by the sex-negative theological interpretations of other faith traditions. We are fortunate to have lifespan sexuality classes for the Our Whole Lives programs, and I encourage you to keep attending whenever they're offered, particularly for adults. It's an important part of lifelong learning. While we believe sexuality is part of the human experience, with variations in what people desire and what they practice, the greater culture feels threatened when the status quo is not maintained. Many powerful structures do not want people to know that there are other options. And sometimes people uphold those because it's threatening to the choices that they made, or because they haven't examined their desires fully and feel it would be pointless or painful to do so. I believe that under this disregard is shame, which isolates us so we're easier to manipulate. After all, people who are unhappy with themselves are more susceptible to messages intended to sell products to fit in better. Think of it like an ad campaign that says, "Why don't you just stay in your beautifully decorated and comfortable closet, my dear? Have a fancy drink while you're in there." Here's a helpful idea from the Our Whole Lives classes about why it seems like there are more queer people today. The best parallel we found in our discussions was how students used to be forced to use their right hand to write, even if they were naturally left-handed. Some people even had their left hand tied behind their back to prevent them from using it. Who's familiar with this? Any southpaws in the crowd? Today, we have a better estimate of how many lefties there are, around 12%. When we stop stigmatizing queerness, we may get a more accurate reflection of those numbers as well. We aren't there yet, so here's my call to inward action. It's about us, not them. As a liberal religious faith, we have an advantage. We emphasize loudly and proudly that whomever you are and whomever you love is welcome here. I'm happy to see that you all are a welcoming congregation and that many of you participate in Pride events. Beyond welcome, there's more to do. Here are 3 questions for self-evaluation. Were you ever offered a choice, or was the default sexual identity the easiest path? Did you ever take a step off the path and experience negative consequences? Given the cost of coming out, how strongly would the past version of yourself had to feel to risk those consequences? And what about today? Is it safer, or does it feel more dangerous to you personally? If your exploration leads you to identify the same way, okay, just be a good ally and keep learning. The outward call to action is this: participate in Pride Month activities and try not to explain why you are there. There's no need. You belong there. We are all proud of all the ways there are to live. Don't assume that you know anything about how someone identifies. Be aware of your assumptions and know that observations may not be correct or may change over time. No group actually knows how many LGBTQ members there are at the moment or how they identify. We can't judge based on how someone looks, who they sit with, what their name is, or what they wear. Support the youth and leave space for adults to evolve too. Be a positive role model, model openness, and keep learning personally, in groups, and what the research says about queerness. Learn why sharing pronouns matters and keep adding to your vocabulary. I went and put my pronouns sticker on my name tag because it's important to me to be an ally, and you might think, well, she's wearing a dress and lipstick. It's really obvious. It's an important part of gender expression and sexual identity as 2 different things, to respect people's pronouns. You can always ask. You can also start with they, them, until you get corrected is another option. To that end, let the gray areas stay. Just like if we replaced half the scissors in RE with left-handed scissors, it doesn't do justice to the variety of ways that people are and what they need. There's fluidity, and people are allowed to evolve. We can emphasize the moral components of Unitarian Universalism and how they align with people expressing healthy, lifelong sexuality in a variety of ways. And moving through pain towards health without numbing behaviors requires support and space for vulnerability. We cannot prevent all addictions, but we can promote belonging and connection by practicing radical welcome. That starts with deep personal reflections, taking opportunities to expand our perspectives, and taking action for additional advocacy so people can embrace how they want to love. There isn't just one way to live, and there isn't one way to do recovery or live your faith. So let's create space for everyone who wants to connect. And as the lyrics of Spirit of Life said, this is giving life the shape of justice. Happy Pride, everyone.